I've been thinking a lot about the occultic application of magical physiology. Certain historical precedents, pop into my head. The Knights Templar, the whole story about Baphomet. What if, and this is a big if, but is it any bigger of an if than anything else in our world? What if this head, this Baphomet head, was really just the head of John the Baptist? And I say that because I've been running into, there have been synchronistic elements between that story and the story of John being beheaded. And I'm not going to get into the greater biblical context of it, but let's just say that there was a man who essentially fit the bill of John the Baptist, and he had some type of supernatural ability to see, to prophesize, to pierce the veil, as it were. Because when you get into the whole story about the Knights Templar, it seems like they attribute a good portion of their wealth, their success, their ability to otherwise be untouchable to this strange head that they all venerated and, gave adoration to, that they worshipped. Almost like this head gave them the ability to see X amount of steps ahead on the game board, and thus forced to act accordingly. There's a lot of that. And then it seems like at some point they lost that ability, i.e., I can't remember which king, but one of those kings was just like, yeah, we've had enough of this crap, and, decided to dissolve the entire order as a whole. So it really makes me wonder, were they in possession of the head at that point? And like I said, I've run into a lot of weird synchronicities with that head, and there's a really, really interesting comic book. I don't know if I've ever recommended his work before, but I do. I recommend his work wholeheartedly. And, a lot of people will balk or scoff at it, but there's a lot of truth. This is a person who exists in those realms, and what he does is he writes comics as a way of, how they do. Releasing truths to the masses. Grant Morrison. There's a really interesting video that he does. And he talks about sigil magic and hyper sigils and all this kind of stuff. Hyper sigil being something where you create a piece of art or a narrative, some type of working narrative that particularly of fictional variety, that then almost creates a supernatural sigil effect. He called it a hyper sigil. Anyway, he described this book he wrote, The Invisibles, as such, as a hyper sigil. And in that first volume, he kind of reveals this secret about this Masonic Templaric secret about Baphomet being the head of John the Baptist. And I there are things that just sit with you, and one of the things in that book that just sat with me, and I think about it still, they were getting their prophecies from this head, but the way they had this head, they had this head connected to tech, to give you a frame of reference. I think back to, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Wild Wild West. There's a car behind me. The light just suddenly, yeah. The movie Wild Wild West, but there's a scene in the movie where character gets beheaded, but they're trying to see what he saw last, and they have his head connected to this projection device. I mean, it's kind of hokey, for movie's sake, but I think there's some truth in that because they're projecting this light that literally goes through his eyeballs and they're able to see what he saw last. That's very interesting when you apply that to a prophetic standpoint. Because remember, you're dealing with individuals, with entities, with groups, societies, whatever. Like, their power 9 times out of 10 doesn't come from, they don't have that power. What they do is they're really good at reverse engineering stuff. They're really good at, and that's the entire gamut, right? That goes from, all this Masonic garbage all the way back to early Gnostic descriptions of the archons and how they couldn't make anything. All they could do is reconstitute what they saw or something that already existed. It's very important on so many levels. Anyway, they had, John the Baptist's head connected to this machine, and that's how they were getting their prophecies. That's how they were able to see into the future. And that's a really interesting, that's a really interesting interpretation of that entire, I dare not call it mythos, but, story. Really interesting. So, you think so much, there's so much of that when you think about it. You think about the stories about the skull and bones and how, what did they have supposedly in their main temple? They had Geronimo's skull. Something's going on there. Something is going on there, They can't do it, but we can revert, like this idea that, think so much is energy, and if you look at it from a technological standpoint, it's like, okay, you can tap into this current. You have a router that can connect to this Wi-Fi. Well, we have no access to this Wi-Fi, but there may be a way we can reverse engineer that router to give us access, and that's what it comes down to. And this extends in so many different facets of religion, of occultism. I mean, look no further than in Catholicism, the application of reliquaries. And they're generally just like the bones of supposed sainted individuals because they're utilizing them for a magical effect. You get what I'm saying? There are a couple of, I don't adhere at all to, religious dogma, much less Catholic dogma. But there are stories and there are descriptions of certain saints that you have to find interesting and wonder who were these individuals as a whole. And did they have any type of connection to, the blighted monstrosity that is, Roman Catholicism? Or were they just special individuals that were kind of folded into the greater monster to achieve a purpose, to achieve a narrative? It's worth looking into. It's worth thinking about. Anyway, how are you guys doing? I'm doing pretty well right now. Hope all is well with you. I'll talk to you when I talk to you. Bye.